Hello everyone, today we are looking at Fragile Dreams Farewell Ruins of the Moon. Wow, this game is, it's really interesting. It's one of those games where, again, I think I've always said this, from a basic technology standpoint, the Wii was made for, like, third-person games, over-the-shoulder games, because your natural pointer is moving the character's viewpoint rather than the camera, which just doesn't work in first person, but whatever. So Fragile Dreams, this is a really weird, interesting, and extremely emotional game. I kind of expected that going into it, and I got exactly what I wanted, plus a little bit more. And despite this being a Wii game, you know, it's sufficient to tell this kind of story. But at the same time, I will admit that the game at certain junctures and certain points is exceptionally broken. Like, actually downright, no one play tested this and they didn't bother to patch it or fix it. But all that being said, I don't really care, because this is definitely one of the more emotional, interesting stories I've played. I don't exactly know how to put into words why it is. But I'll just go over the basic premise. Basically, you play as Seto, a young, Japanese boy, and you wake up in this world where essentially everyone has disappeared, and the only person you had left was your grandfather. And so where everyone has disappeared, you're trying to figure out what has happened to humanity and society. Was everyone, like, raptured or something? And you're kind of piecing together, the society that was here and the few remaining people who do stay alive and active. There are certain characters you meet where you meet a robot, you meet, an animal, you meet a ghost, you meet a human who actually turns out to be a robot, and all this other stuff. And Seto himself, he's just like a boy just trying to figure out everything in this world. And the other thing that's interesting too is the music in this game is really, really nice, really moving. A lot of sorrow, frankly. There are elements of horror here and there, but they're not super, I would say, significant to the atmosphere of the game. Where a lot of it is just very much, again, like, emotional and based on solving the issues that people had in life. And now that the whole world is ended and over, all of people's personal problems seem so petty and unimportant, but at the same time, they're part of a collective idea of who they were as a person, that despite all their little struggles that made them who they were. I don't know, this game really makes you think a lot about, life and human relationships and a little bit of existentialism here and there, but it's just a very deeply sorrowful, emotional game that, I don't know, it's a mood, it's a real vibe, and it does it very, very well. And the game is not terribly long. I think it's the appropriate amount. And it's something that I just have never forgotten. It also has one of the most interesting side characters, who is a merchant. And when you find out, the Chicken Man, and you find out why the Chicken Man is doing what he's doing, even he, this crazy, like, merchant-esque Resident Evil 4 kind of guy, has his own emotional backstory. There's always some kind of sad, interesting story lurking behind every character in this world. And it's such a, I don't know, I'm just so deeply moved and touched by it that it's such a beautiful thing to me. The other thing I've noticed is that there are certain areas in the game that actually look very beautiful. There's certain sunsets or sunrises or some kind of aurora borealis that's in the sky that looks very majestic and mystical. And you're kind of wondering exactly, what is, fantasy, what is reality? I can talk to ghosts, so what exactly happened here? And there is a big, like, long conspiracy that you do uncover exactly what happened to people, how it involved things like, diseases and basically something was triggered that just wiped out all of humanity, and except for Seto and a few select others, and you're trying to find out why that is. So there's also a mystery there as well as an emotional tale to tell. But this whole kind of concept of exploring a post-apocalyptic area without it being like extremely, I mean, it is necessarily dangerous, but it's not necessarily depressing. It's just very sorrowful, essentially. A lot of the enemies you fight are kind of like, left on robots or other spirits that are kind of just wandering the city and countryside. And the main component is that really leads Seto on for a while is that there's this girl, and she, of course, is the only other human left alive, seemingly. So he basically chases her, and she's kind of this free spirit who kind of is just jumping around like a feral animal almost. And so she becomes his only motivation to like make contact with like another human being. So I think I might as well talk about the basic mechanics and gameplay because they are fully just broken. Well, mostly. So Seto, he basically is equipped with a flashlight, and wherever you're pointing with the Wii mode is where he will be pointing his flashlight. Combat is very, very basic and straightforward. You basically encounter certain enemies that, are in the environment, and you do like a basic 3-hit combo. And I think like it's infuriatingly difficult, but the weapons have durability in this game, and so they will break, and so you have to find better weapons. And it's things like sticks and whatever, and almost twigs basically, and little like kitchen knives. But it's actually really cool. I really like this. By the end of the game, you've been using all this crappy equipment, and one of the last weapons you can pick up is actually a real life katana, which I thought was really, really cool. Again, I'm not a super fan of durability systems, but I feel like it kind of adds or makes sense of like at least in this setting and in this game. And again, it's very like super janky, like Japanese jank. Like this is very much, not great. For example, like for the most part, you can deal with it because at least it's predictable in a janky way. I mean, my whole philosophy is if a game is broken, as long as it's broken consistently, you can know what its rules are, and then you can like plan around that. So it was this really interesting thing. For example, I was in this one area essentially where there were all these kind of vents on the ground, and if you stepped on one, you had a possibility of falling down or falling through or tripping on it, and the collision on the tiles was just broken and off, and I was getting stopped and stuck just from walking, and it was just really, really bad. It was just abysmally like mind-boggling bad and broken. But I realized it was mostly the brown tiles, so I was able to just navigate around those and like survive. So even though the game was really busted and like the collision was making me stop and bug me out, and the frame rate was dropping and all this insanely frustrating stuff, but it was broken enough that I was able to figure out how to work within the confines of the game. And, it worked in kind of a mostly predictable manner. And it's very cool, like, you're at the end of the game, you're in the sewer section, there's these giant kind of like spider bot things, and you are basically very low on health items and weapons and whatever, and you really need to be strategic in how you work yourself around that. And the gameplay does get pretty decently difficult in that last area for sure. But again, you kind of work and live in the environment of the game itself. You adapt yourself to it. It was a really weird experience that's hard for me to explain because, again, you can predict how the game is going to be broken, and it becomes almost a metagame on top of it. Because you're like, okay, well, I know if I do that, even though the game says I should do that, it's not going to work. And you start playing almost a different game on top of the one you're playing. It was a really weird experience, but I found it actually very pleasant because I felt like I had, outsmarted the game, because what it was telling me to do I knew wouldn't work, or I had my own strategy, and the way I approached it, I was able to make it work on my own terms, and that to me was, I think, honestly pretty cool. Anyway, a lot of the game you're just exploring, these places where They've been abandoned by time. You're rediscovering this hidden world that has been basically been lost. Seto's a very, emotional, kind of innocent character, and he's, very, I would say, interesting, nice to be around. And near the beginning of the game, he actually gets a robot buddy, and so that kind of becomes the pair. And well, I just have to say that I thought would last throughout the whole game, but no, it's very interesting. In the first act, this robot buddy that I thought was going to be the iconic sidekick to Seto for the whole game runs out of battery and just dies. There's no battery pack to find, there's no way to recharge it. The little robot just quietly dies and thanks him for his time together, and then Seto's alone again. This game is just, I don't know, so somber, so interesting, and I know it made with so much soul and passion that I know it appeals to me on a lot of levels. I just think it's very beautiful in how somber it is. And ironically, by the end of the game, you're taking on this final boss fight, which is pretty epic at the top of Tokyo Tower, and it's this huge kind of showdown, which I think is so funny. But yeah, this is definitely a Wii cult classic, a Wii hit that you absolutely should play if you do have a Wii. It's a wonderful game. It's a very emotional game, and it's really great. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, with that being said, I think you kind of get the idea and the gist and the vibe of this game. So I guess I'll see you guys later. Bye.